Hi everybody, it's Amy Armstrong here. I'm part of the RCP community and a root cause protocol consultant myself. Today I am sitting down with Parris Hodges. Hi Parris.
Hi, Amy.
So just going to making sure I've got you on the right view.
Yeah, perfect.
So today, let's just get stuck in, Parris. So today Parris is going to tell us a bit about how she came across the RCP and Morley's work. And perhaps, Parris, start by sharing a bit about your own health struggles and how you actually came to find the RCP.
Yeah, and thank you so much for asking me to be here, Amy. I'm really excited for this. I always like to start this. I was swirling around the cosmic soup of life and decided like those people were the ones that I wanted to come be birthed with. But I started life out, experiencing quite a bit of illness at a very young age. What was really popular in the 80s was mothers weren't really well supported in lactation. And so I was put on formula at roughly 6 weeks old. And then on top of it, they started giving me rice cereal. And at I think I was roughly 7 months old, I experienced spinal meningitis. And that was the foundation in which I had to build a life off of. And also to share too, like more background, I'm number 3 of 4 children. So we also understand the mineral content passed down. And my mom had experienced 3 miscarriages prior to my birth. Yeah. So we already kind of can see there the mineral foundation that I received, and no fault to anyone, like all doing the best that they could. But the rest of my life up until, I'm now 35 was just plagued with quite a bit of illness, both physical as well as like mental illness. I started when I was in elementary school, I had bloody noses, like gushing bloody noses that would go upwards of 20 minutes. And then when I did start having a menstrual cycle, my bloody noses stopped because my very intelligent body was offloading all of the iron. And then I started to dance with bulimia that I walked down for 16 years. And during that time, I experienced a miscarriage. Just about any kind of diagnostic label that one could be given, I had been from. They thought I had leukemia at one point in time. They thought that I had lupus. And then I experienced my own personal first miscarriage when I was 22 years old. I was engaged at the time. And after that, I was so sick, I had to medically withdraw from college. From a semester, and then was in and out of the hospital, and no doctor could figure out what was like wrong with me. Fast forward a couple years, I was then told by an OBGYN that I had endometriosis so bad that I may never be able to conceive. And I was given the option of having a hysterectomy at 25 years old. And a few months later, I ended up being able to conceive and brought my son into the world. But postpartum, I crashed and burned. And I started experiencing cognitive function loss, like so great that I would forget where I was and what I was even talking about, like much less even like how to form words. And it was quite scary, and no doctor knew like anything, and much less like any sort of direction to point me in. And fast forward the story even more, plagued with like far more illness. And then 2019, I refer to as my dark night of the soul. I found out at the beginning of the year that I had cervical cancer. And then the rest of that year, I was incredibly sick. I had pneumonia multiple times, sinus infections, bacterial infections, like just anything you could think of. And my body was finally like quite literally failing. And part of that story too is, you know, with a liver that was so overloaded with iron, as we now know, one thing that I could recognize is that alcohol wasn't helping that situation at all. And
Yeah.
I was really fortunate that somebody caught that. And I ended up becoming sober, and that like opened a whole floodgate for me. And in the following 2 years, as my body started really healing, I started having lots of little things placed in my path along this way that led me to have a friend share Morley's work. And that was the beginning of 2021 is when I did. And I actually had signs around that time that my cervical cancer was starting to come back. And I was already, had already implemented things like beef liver, and had naturally fallen away from taking iron supplements, which throughout most of my life, I was taking large amounts of. And the first time that I heard Morley on a podcast, it was April 2022. And it just, everything clicked. Yeah. And a couple months before that, I had kept hearing these whispers about copper. I don't know like where it was coming from, like by any means,
yeah.
and kept felt guided towards different copper things. You know, I already spoke to like adding organ meats into my diet, and it was just like really synchronistic how everything was like being set up. And I had also heard these whispers about looking into the nosebleeds that I had experienced as a child, that there was some greater connection within that entire storyline. And one of the things that I really loved when I heard Morley talk was the way that he blended in the psychosomatics of this all and the emotional component. And I was like, oh, this man gets it.
Yeah.
He gets it. Because I mean, up until that point, I had listened to many different practitioners who just talk about it, everything just purely on a biological level,
Yeah.
but we're complete reflections of our internal landscape, as above, so below. And Morley so eloquently discusses this and shares that out into the world. And that took me down an even deeper rabbit hole, and I haven't looked back since.
Yeah. So somewhere in that process of you know, making those connections for yourself, that perhaps iron wasn't what your body needed, and that, you know, copper coming into your world as something that was being highlighted, you know, that was going to, you know, increase your health. I'm guessing somewhere in there you actually started the root cause protocol for yourself.
Yeah. Well, that was
what did that look like for you?
Yeah, that was one of the really beautiful things, that when Morley's work was shared with me by one of my girlfriends, I was already naturally, and had like, you know, my deeper intuition had already guided me to a place where I was already essentially on a lot of phase one, that there weren't a lot of shifts. So formally, I began implementing the root cause protocol April 2021. And but again, like part of what felt like great affirmation of the work was that, like, by so many synchronistic ways, I had already done the stops and was already implementing part of the root cause protocol. So, but that officially kicked off. So I've now been doing the RCP for a little over a year now.
Yeah. And what have you noticed in that short time, just in terms of your symptoms and the way you're feeling within yourself?
Oh my goodness. I tell Morley often, thank you for helping me get my life back, because like the person that I was even 2.5 years ago, when I walked into that world of sobriety, and I for the first time in my life had started experiencing debilitating anxiety attacks. Something I didn't talk to too much was my menstrual cycles that I was experiencing. I was bleeding. I was letting out like over a pint of blood a day for like 5 days straight. Like, that was the blood loss that I was experiencing. I have no problem sharing it, but I'm on day 3 of my cycle currently. And though like I still do have higher degree of like blood loss, it's nothing compared to what I was at one point in time. And to the point that I can actually hold conversations, that I'm not just locked in bed for 7 days straight.
Yeah.
And that to me is huge, as well as like just how I experience my cycle as a whole, because, in a body that exists in a cyclical way, we are a different human every single day. And unfortunately for me, what that looked like for a large percentage of my life was in a state of debilitating anxiety. And, really like the way that I was engaged with life, like wasn't fully present. And now I actually can be, which is huge, in and of itself, to like actually feel capable of standing on your own 2 feet.
Yeah. Yeah. And so is there anything else you want to share with us about, your journey on the RCP before we kind of shift gears and talk about you then going back to study at the RCP Institute?
I don't think so yet. There might be other pieces that come as we share, because of course I very soon after discovering Morley's work started the RCP Institute, because the next cohort was in July. And I hadn't chosen to work with an RCPC because it just didn't feel available to me at the time. And also I'm incredibly curious. And this is, Morley talks about this. We're all control freaks, those of us who come across this work. And so the way that I controlled that situation was by me, jumping in and taking that next step of like wanting to further understand both what was happening inside of my own body, because I just didn't align with allopathic care and haven't for a really long time, and really just wanted to understand a lot more.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about your experience going through the Institute. It's as we were talking about before we hit record, it's 16 weeks and it's just so packed full of information, and making links all the time, and the amount of research that Morley also sends your way as you're going through the process is pretty phenomenal. And it can be quite daunting to start out with. So tell us about your experience and what you got from it.
Yeah, I was quite excited to start it. And I haven't yet formally figured out a better way to describe it, but it felt like med school on crack is what it felt like.
I think I've heard you say that before, and I would say that was fair. Yes, I agree.
You're really jumping into the deep end, but you're really well supported along the way. Morley's a brilliant teacher in how he describes and breaks everything down and tells us that he's not trying to make us into microbiologists, which I don't know if that's actually true. However, the support systems that the RCP is really structured the entire institute to have, like the tutor groups, was huge for me. And just how many resources were available to really be able to further understand. Being able to listen to Morley's case studies and really just have the reiteration of everything. And, Morley goes over it all, like constantly, and it becomes simple and it becomes ingrained in you, but it is like you're learning an entire new language, and that just takes time and it takes practice. And luckily you're walking through this not alone. You have individuals within your cohort that you're able to be in communication with and know that you're totally not alone on this path.
Yeah. Yeah. And tell us about, you mentioned the tutorials that go alongside the live learning with Morley. Tell us, tell us about those and what you got out of that process.
Yeah, I loved them. I'm still in communication with a lot of the individuals that I was in my tutor group with. My particular tutor was CJ, who I absolutely adore, and who's quite brilliant herself. And it was a great time every week to be able to have more conversation amongst one another. I mean, you get to know your group pretty well, because then you're also doing case studies on one another and really kind of diving in and practicing doing the role playing. And that was a really beautiful space to be able to grow those greater roots into your foundation of potentially being an RCPC, or even if you just wanted a greater understanding for your own personal well-being. It's a great time to be able to engage into more of the nuance that can come up too, because like we do have a really great structure built for us, but there's so much bio individuality that goes into it, and that everybody has a really beautiful little piece to the puzzle that they're able to add. And I found that within the tutor group, especially.
Yeah, and the live sessions with Morley, I found really sort of are the structural, part. If you're using the analogy of a body, they're really the bones of it. But that flesh is start to build up. You build that on in the tutorial groups, and where you're able to make the connections between Morley's teaching and kind of gel it with your own experience, and then talk about that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So now that you've taken the training, what are you doing with yourself, and are you using the training in a professional sense now?
Yeah, I am. And I went into the program without the expectation that I was necessarily going to walk out and be an RCPC. Like I knew that could be a possibility, but I wasn't tied to it by any means. I was doing very different one-on-one work already. And it just, at some point in time, it sort of became difficult to not see the world through that lens and to be able to like blend it and integrate it all together. So I am working with individuals one-on-one right now, and most of my clients tend to be individuals that came into this life in a female body that runs on a 28 to 31 day hormone cycle, and integrating the understanding of our cyclical nature through the lens of how the minerals play out within the framework of the body. So that's what I'm doing with all of it now.
That's fascinating. And were you working with clients, prior to the RCP, or is that new for you as well?
No, I was working with clients. I had just begun what I refer to myself as a cyclical living guide. And so I was talking about the energetics of the menstrual cycle and coaching on that all, and it naturally blends in because again, we're complete reflections, as above so below, and how we show up in reverence and deep nurturing of that cyclical nature. It really is reflective as to what's occurring on a mineral level inside of our body, and thus how we are actively engaged with life as a whole.
That's really fascinating to me how how you've kind of combined that passion around the cyclical nature of our cycle, and now being able to integrate that that mineral knowledge, which is really underpins all of it, doesn't it?
Well,
Yeah.
and Morley talks about this all in such a beautiful way too. Like he talks about how fear is iron, and he and I have engaged in conversation. I like to think of copper as unconditional love, and the way that we are anchored into that and like satiated by life, which is retinol, that is
Yeah.
fat. And so how we're able to be satisfied by life, like this is what's playing out on a cellular level inside of our body. And I view magnesium as that frequency of, I've heard Morley say this before, that he doesn't remember, it's the frequency of gratitude, but to me it's a lot of that frequency of the approval of what is. And so to me, it's, we can see these cycles at play all the time, and our cells work on a cycle sense also. And so, to me, there's no other way to view it than to integrate the mineral portion of it all.
Yeah, yeah. And so you were telling me that you are a sucker for punishment. You're actually going back for more learning in group 16. Is that right?
I am. And I'm quite excited for that. I mean, that's one of the beautiful things that we have available to us as RCP alumni is the ability to go back through at a, discounted rate. And I think that that's amazing that that's available to us, especially because, like we were discussing, there's so much nuance that occurs. And the brilliant thing about Morley and Kristan and everybody that's a part of the RCP is that they're continually growing. This isn't something that's like super stagnant and stale by any means. Like it's continually evolving, and Morley's always adding more information. And so being able to go back through it and hear other people's perspectives too, like the new individuals coming into this. And so I'm really excited to be a part of the next group and to just continue to further my own understanding. And kind of to touch on also what we were discussing before we started recording is like my cognitive function over the last year my capacity has increased so much.
Yeah.
And so being able to see things that I couldn't see before, and to understand more of those pieces that I couldn't before when I wasn't in the mineral status that I am now. And so like, that's the really beautiful thing of all of this work, and being able to nourish ourselves on this level that I'm really, really, truly grateful for.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've had a similar experience. I find myself really evolving alongside the RCP training. And I guess that's probably why I've taken it 3 times myself. And I most certainly will go back in the next few groups again, because it's like, it's these layers as I'm healing, and as my cognitive function improves, I'm able to take on more. It's just a really lovely process to keep going back in and, okay, what can I build on now, and what's the next layer of information or depth of information that I'm going to be able to take on. So yeah, it's a little bit of addictive, if you have that thirst for knowledge, and the more you know, the more you realize you don't know, so
yeah.
it's a never-ending process.
Yeah, it's quite a testament to all of this work, I think, truly, is the ability to, because our nervous system is so essential in that, and its capacity to continue to hold and grow. Absolutely. And expand.
Yeah. So I guess to wrap it up, Parris, if you could summarize in a sentence or two how the RCP has changed or improved your life, what would you say?
Well, like I shared with you, and like I say to Morley often, the RCP really truly gave me my life back, because the individual, if he would have reached out to me 2.5 years ago, I could barely get out of bed, much less be a mom. And that's my most important job in this world. And so I'm incredibly grateful for Morley and the entire RCP team, because I actually feel like a human again, which is amazing.
Yeah. And thank you for sitting down with me today. I think we're very blessed to have you as part of this ever-growing community, and it really does, really is a sense of community and, you know, like minds coming together, which I think, you know, in this world is more important than ever to have. So thank you for sharing your story with us, and yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amy. I'm really excited for everything that you're putting together here. So
Yeah,
grateful
thank
to be
you.
part of
Yep,
it.
just trying to share people's stories because I think it's so important. Thanks, Parris.
Of course.